Hi, everybody, and welcome to Starting Out Bright. In case we have not met, my name is Noreen Savage, and I get asked why I'm doing these Zooms. So very briefly, I just want to tell you who I am. First of all, I'm nobody official with Bright Line Eating, but the program has done a lot for me, and I believe it can help a lot of people. So I got started in July of 2019. In May, a friend of mine, Lori, posted on her private Facebook page that she had lost 57 pounds in 1 year. And so she posted and said, if anybody was interested to find out how, just message her. And of course, my little fingers went and messaged Lori's just as fast as I could get over there. And she proceeded to tell me, if you're new to bright line eating, there are 4 bright lines that you don't cross. No sugar, no flour, 3 meals a day, and weighed and measured portions. And to all of that, I said, absolutely no way. There was no way I could do that. But fortunately, I was in some pain. And I say that now because that pain in my feet and my back and my knee, and really knowing sometimes at night I was having thoughts of would I wake up in the morning. That kind of pain at 270 pounds and 5'2" was scaring me enough to make me willing to try something again one more time. So one thing that Lori told me was to get involved with the community and to buy the book, Bright Line Eating by Dr. Susan Pierce Thompson. And I would strongly suggest if you're brand new that you do that too, to reach out to community and definitely buy the book. So I got started, and through this first year, I just was amazed at all the people losing weight, but even more than that, how free they were. Their minds were free. And I promised myself that if I made it 1 year, I would do what my friend Lori did. I would post on Facebook and I would help anybody I could. Well, I'm a Christian, and just before that year was up, God had other plans for me. He said, Noreen, you can do more than that. It's the time of Zooms. You could connect these people, all these wonderful people you met, and connect them with the people who really need some hope. And so that's what I hope to accomplish in the Zooms, and specifically in this Zoom, I have no doubt that there will be some hope because we have a phenomenal guest. And please help me welcome Ed Pettit.
Thank you,
Ed,
Noreen. Thank you very much. It's really good to be here, and welcome to all those who have joined and those who may listen after this live event.
Yes, thank you for allowing me to record this, Ed, as I know that your words will be of great comfort to somebody who may be desperate. And, I told a little bit very briefly about my story, but one thing that, if you're not familiar with who Ed is, he's been doing a fabulous service to the Bright Line Eating community by posting his words, his thoughts, his research very frequently. And when I reached out to Ed, I'm sure he had no idea who I was, but I had been reading his work and was very inspired. So one concept that he brings in is the red dot. And so, the red dot in the mall, this is where I take it from your work, Ed, is you are here. So we're here tonight, but how did we get here? And specifically you, Ed, doesn't matter how far back you want to go, how did you get right here?
Yeah, so I appreciate the invitation to be here, and that little statement of what is your red dot truth, like in the mall, the arrow, the red dot, you are here. It's like, well, where am I? And for me, that's been a part of my journey. Is I've had a difficult time in my food addiction and my journey in life to be able to identify what's really going on the inside. And that's part of what I believe has been God's generous search and rescue mission in my life, but it's played out over the span of 20 years. This is my 20th year in 12-step recovery work and my probably first 15 months in Bright Line Eating. And so the short version of it is I've had a weight issue most of my life. I weighed more in junior high than I do today. I was the heaviest kid in my class. I remember what that felt like. And then at times I would become less overweight and more of my right size. But when I got married in my early 20s, I was in my right size body. But I can remember what happened as I gained weight, and I did a very strict medically monitored program, got to my goal weight, maintained it for a year. And I remember the events that were happening the week that I started eating again. And over the following 10 years, I gained 140 pounds. I let go of everything that I had learned. And it was in 2001 that I stepped into my first 12-step meeting for compulsive overeaters. It's an anonymous program, so I'm not going to name it specifically, but that's probably sufficient. And so I was over 330 pounds at that time. And to make the longer story short, I've managed to drop out of 12-step recovery work a number of times. And wouldn't you know, every time I did, I'd have this common experience of gaining weight. I never got back up as high as I was, but I'm currently in the low 170s, and I would find my weight creeping up into 235, 245, 250, and this has been part of my journey in life. And when I found Bright Line Eating, which was January of 2020, it was kind of one of those thin threads that seemed to appear out of nowhere for no reason. And I read the book. I took the 14-day challenge that day after I took what Susan calls the susceptibility test, which is how likely is it that I have an issue with food addiction, and I turned out to be a 10, which is the highest on the chart. And the very next day, I started the 14-day challenge. It's another offering of the program, but my investment was the cost of the book. Actually, initially, I just used the library version, but then I did buy the book. And then I think the 14-day challenge is perhaps $14 today, or it might be $30. But that's the extent of what I've invested in the program. Mm. And this isn't a program where you have to buy their packets or their food or their anything. And it's just about learning something new about the whole issue of food addiction and a path forward. And that's what I'm very excited to talk about, because I feel like Bright Line Eating's been a significant missing link for me in my journey.
Now, I find it interesting. You're not the first one who's told me that you actually went first to the library to get the book. And I speak for myself that I had a collection of diet books, but I did get the book. And I've said this a number of times that getting into it, the first 5 chapters, the science, I shut the book and said, I'm going to get thin. Did you have an experience like that you actually went and bought the book, you signed up? I mean, was it that compelling of the science that you felt, Ed, that I'm going to do this thing?
Yeah, so the thin thread of how I found the book, we have a friend in California. My wife and her have been friends for many, many years, and she found success on Bright Line Eating, talked with my wife about it, and my wife got the book out of the library, not even thinking of me, thinking of somebody else. She doesn't have any issues with body weight or food. And I picked it up, and she saw me picking it up. She's, and what do you do with a book like that for me? I go right to the middle. Well, what's the heart of this thing? And she said, oh, I've already read part of it, and the author suggests don't do that because all the stuff up front gives you what you need to know so that you stick with it. And that's what I've appreciated. And I did read all of that I needed to that first day. I had some free space. And Dr. Susan Pierce has the same affliction that I have, food addiction, compulsive overeating. She has a background in 12-step work. And she had developed this approach, which she learned from others, but she cultivated it, and she went on to get her PhD in neuroscience, focusing on food addiction. And somehow her background of being, I'm just going to say one of us, one of me, a food addict, and her background in 12-step and her going on to get her PhD, she's a very articulate communicator. It's been the missing link. So yes, I did have that enthusiasm. I thought, oh, this is good. And like I said, I did the prep work with the 14-day challenge, got my food scale, and the very next day, I began my Bright Line eating journey. That was mid-January of 2020.
I think it's interesting when you say you read what you needed to read. I went to the middle too, and then went because I found the line that says, no, go back to the first page.
Mm-hmm.
I just read the science and I used a chart for a while, for a couple months, because I was so convicted by the science. So one little quick question about the prior program that you did lose weight before you got married. Was
Yes,
that more of a willpower type thing that you felt like you stuck with it? I mean, because you obviously lost all your weight.
I did.
But
Yeah,
were you white knuckling it then or not?
It was called Physicians Weight Loss Center. I don't know that they still exist, but you had to go into the doctor's office. They had people in white coats.
Yeah.
And not to be crude, but you had to go into the restroom, and there was a stick, and it determined whether you were in ketosis.
Oh.
And it was a very restrictive diet. I don't remember the specifics.
Okay.
But I stuck with it, and I stuck with it until I didn't. I signed up for the maintenance. There was a cost to it. I went in once a week for to validate that I was still not cheating. And the week that I started eating again, it was the week that my mother was dying. I had all kinds of work-related stress, which for me is a common theme. Was not handling that well. And we're in the process of adopting our first child after a long season of infertility. And my mom died at the end of October that year, and our first daughter was born and came into our family through adoption that December. And that was literally the week that I started eating again, and I couldn't stop. I tried different approaches. I would have determination, and if at 10 a.m. I was in the office and there was something in the kitchen, I was powerless other than to not just have an appropriate amount with others, but then I'd go back and bring more back to my desk and hide it and hoard it.
Oh,
and,
absolutely.
Yeah, going from a relatively normal size weight of, I think I was probably 190 to 340 pounds in those 10 years was tough. It was a size 34 waist to a 54 during that time. That's a lot of trips to the clothing store, which I don't like to do, and just a lot of shame and frustration that I could not stop eating.
So Ed, you shared with me, and we had a chance to talk the other day too, to see what topics would be of interest here. One thing that you did mention to me, and I think you've made it clear in your posts in the community, was that you stuck with the Bright Line eating until you got to maintenance, and then you had a moment that turned into more than a moment. Is that correct?
That is correct. I've not had the experience of being what some call a crystal vaser, where you're sticking within the 4 bright lines every day. In 2020, I didn't have that. Interestingly, here in 2021, I have had that experience. But I think as I got to my right size body, I started to make some accommodations. And it was an interesting deal, because I would still weigh and measure my food. I'd do the planning and the prep work. But what first got me is on my way into dinner, I would be hungry and I would graze a bit, a piece of cheese, maybe a couple, not weighed, not measured. And then after dinner, I'd see my wife get her snack. Like I said, she doesn't have a weight issue and she enjoys things that I used to enjoy. And I would go and get my bowl, and it would be compliant food, but it was extra. It wasn't a part of the meal. And what I found over the 3 months, I was sort of back into denial, saying, well, I can handle it. It's not a problem. I'm not gaining weight. But in truth, I had put the scale away, the body scale away. And my clothes were still fitting, sort of. But when I did step on the scale in December, I'd gained 12 pounds. and I was discouraged, and I was finding I was scared because I didn't know that I could stop that extra eating that I was doing. And I did a post on nut butter saying I've been 2 weeks off of the nut butter. It's a good thing, but looking at my pantry, and I had a picture of a number of jars of unopened nut butter. They were upside down.
Mm-hmm.
And I asked for help. I'm thinking I want to get rid of it, but I'm struggling. And I had some really good input. And I made the decision to get rid of the nut butter out of my house. And that was a turning point for me. In recovery, I've learned that it's a program of action. It's not a program of fix my thinking. It's a program of action that leads to my thinking getting fixed. And that earlier program that I was on, it strictly dealt with the physical. Here's what you need to do in terms of caloric intake. And in 12-step recovery work, we talk about it being a three-legged stool. I noticed that in your prelude, it's the deeper work, emotional, spiritual, and physical. And just recently, I've pieced together for me the stool part, the seat part is sobriety. And this was the missing. It was a great year in 2020. I got to my goal weight, and then I didn't. And I've stated that I'm hopeful that what happened Q4 of last year, it was my last and final research project. I sometimes refer to myself as a retired researcher because I know my diagnosis. I'm a food addict. I know the prescription. Dr. Susan Pierce Thompson has outlined that clearly. There's 4 bright lines that are clearly defined, unambiguous, that I just don't cross. And I know that I need support. I can't do it alone. And my 12-step recovery groups that I'm involved in, I've got one that is sometimes referred to as secular because it's all about the God of your understanding. And another one that I'm in, which is a faith-based group called Celebrate Recovery. And that's my band of brothers. And I go to several meetings a week. But what I found is I can't just have the faith-based one where I'm the only guy who's wrestling with food addiction. I need to have the fellowship where there are others who are also compulsive overeaters, food addicts, and on a path of sobriety. And so for me, the stool part is when we talk about come all the way into the recovery room. When you come to a recovery meeting, Susan uses the analogy, sit all the way down. For me, that stool is 100% bright line eating sobriety where I don't take a bite off plan ever. And I kind of made the connection that it's, I have a lot of friends who are recovering alcoholics. And if I were to say to one of them who's been sober for 30 plus years, yeah, I get it, you're sober, but when do you recreationally drink? Or when do you just take a drink to, take the edge off? Or if there's stress, tell me about that. Well, they'd look at me and say, never, I don't drink alcohol. I can drink all kinds of things, but not alcohol ever. And that's kind of my view toward my 100% sobriety, that I don't take a bite off plan ever. I did that last fall, and I know where that leads me to. So, but here's the thing: I have a great deal of empathy and compassion if there's a person who is not there yet. But my encouragement is, what might it take for you to cross over that difficult transition, where that then becomes perhaps your way, if you're a 10 on the susceptibility scale, and if you desire freedom from the obsession of food addiction.
I have a question about, and I hope this isn't like turning back the clock, but when you said something about when you went off, you put your scale away. How often were you weighing yourself in the first place?
I've experimented, and I think Dr. Susan Pierce Thompson would say, you can do it daily, you can do it weekly, you can do it monthly.
Right.
Just try to have more structure around it, so it's not kind of whenever you feel like it, and not be consistent. And so I've experimented with all 3, but I was doing weekly until I stopped doing weekly.
And do you think that you subconsciously thought I've arrived now at my maintenance goals, so I can put this away, and it's like the old diet mentality? Or I'm just trying to figure out where, because you recovered pretty quickly, but what made you put that scale away? Did you really kind of know the weight was creeping up and you didn't want to, as you say, be in denial?
I thought I could perhaps get away with it. Isn't that an interesting thought
Mhm.
for somebody like me? And I started to take these exit ramps, a little deviation, and they were subtle at first, and then they got larger, which is always the case. I've heard it said that addiction is progressive. It takes you into the addiction deeper. If you give in a little bit, then there's always more. And that was kind of my experience. And I did reach out for some support with people from my mastermind group. This was a group that I got involved in with Bright Line Eating shortly after I started. And there were 5 of us, and all of us started within a relatively similar time, probably a month or two of each other. And I remember having a conversation with one of my friends and just saying, I don't know that I can stop. And the person was very empathic, very compassionate. It was a good connection, but I didn't have the willingness at that time, and I continued to eat off plan. Um, so as I've examined that, I think that's the closest I can get to my understanding is I thought perhaps I could handle it. And if it was compliant food, if it was this, if it was that. And, as I say that, it reminds me of parts of the AA Big Book, which I use in both of these recovery groups that I'm involved in, where the alcoholic might say, well, I think if I put milk in it, then I can handle it. Or if it's this substance instead of this. And the bottom line is, Noreen, I am a food addict, and that's what I do. And oftentimes self-deception or denial has been a part of the experience. And when we talk about red dot truth honesty, I'm grateful that I'm learning how to be honest about here's how I'm feeling, here's what's going on inside of me, and the willingness to bring that into the light of authentic, connected relationships. And that's where that three-legged stool of the emotional and the spiritual recovery, as well as the physical recovery for me, I need all of those elements, as well as a clear definition of what sobriety looks like for me as a food addict. And that's the part that BLE has given me. And I believe that Susan and the team do an excellent job of offering different options with boot camp, with the Grit, Reboot, Resume program, with the whole internal family systems and parts works. I think all of this is about doing some of that internal work, and the idea that connected community. For me, it's not optional, and I need to be with other people that have the same affliction that I do. I've come to find.
Well, that was what I was just going to ask you. Do I've often said one of my mantras is I am enough. And part of it is saying, I am enough to do this alone. I am enough when I say doing it alone in a house full of people who are not doing what I'm doing. I am enough by myself to do this. However, to say I am going to do it alone is a little different than what you're talking about, because with the community, I just think it's so important. And you had kind of that vantage point of having the 12-step program experience before coming into BLE. Do you think that helped you? Like just
Yeah, without a doubt.
Having that? Okay.
Yeah, so some people are familiar with the steps, and the short version of the first 3 steps is I can't, about powerlessness and unmanageability.
Mhm.
And the second one is God can, came to believe there was a power greater than myself that could restore my life to sanity. And the third one is let God, turning my life and my will over to the care of God. And in the secular group, we say, as I understand him. And then next comes the fearless, thorough moral inventory. And I didn't start that 4th step until my 9th year, having been in 12-step for 5 years, dropping out for several years. And when I started back, it was in a group called Celebrate Recovery, where people with all kinds of different addictions come together and do recovery together. And I did that with a sponsor, working the steps in order. And a full year, I couldn't have my first abstinent day. And my sponsor recommended, how about you add back into your program? So like a good sponsee, I did that starting that week, January of 2010. And it took me 6 months going to both before I could have my first day of abstaining from my compulsive overeating. And at that time, I was defining it as 3 meals a day, nothing in between. And that was as specific as I got. It took me 6 months to be able to do that. So for me, the addiction runs deep. And I think I talk about sometimes that in my current state, I have gratitude coming out of places that I didn't even know I had places. And I'm bumping into joy in ways that I didn't think possible, because I think the depths of the despair that I've come from in my food addiction issues and the particular nature of my wounds and some of the deeper work that's been happening, it's somehow informing the level of gratitude that I have and my willingness to live life out loud if it might help another come out of the ditch of misery from compulsive overeating and have the freedom that I've been gifted in my journey.
Well, let's talk about that, Ed, because now, as many of us know you, is through this amazing work that you do. And that to me is living your life out loud and having that thin thread between people. Even though there's a different, deeper meaning about the thin thread. I don't know if you want to get into that, but just how long have you been writing, like these daily or every other day or so, these really deep, thought-provoking questions and, just your wonderful work?
Yeah,
How long have you been doing that?
I don't know. It's not been a super long time, but here's a couple of things that have influenced me. And I don't know if Cindy is on the call tonight, but her posts with her amazing artwork that she hands draws and her generosity really touched me. And there was one post that she had where she had a quote from a man that I don't recall his name, but I think I put it in my post today, if anybody saw that. But he had this analogy about an apple tree just making apples. And it was, for me, remarkable because the apple tree doesn't get concerned about the number of apples that's going to go into production and what they're going to get used for and how to market them. It's just concerned about making apples. And something about that really resonated with me. And I saw one of the comments from some other BLE participant today where it resonated with that person as well. And so that I think somehow I felt as an invitation for me, perhaps like you, Noreen, felt it was, I can do more. And look at what the more is that you've created, this forum where you're inviting people to come and tell their stories. And I know that your intent is to elevate hope for individuals who are suffering. And it's similar for me that if I can be an apple tree just making apples, seeing the thin threads of opportunity to connect, and and it's not about me getting a reward. I get nothing from doing this, Noreen. I don't think you get anything from doing this. We're not connected with the official program. But somehow something's been shifting in me where I feel like with my awareness, my gratitude, my sobriety, it's opening up these situations where I really am bumping into joy, and I want to live with open-handed, open-hearted generosity toward those like me. And I'm not, I've mentioned in my post, there is no graduation ceremony for people who are in recovery. I have not arrived, but every morning I get the privilege of arriving in my right-sized body, and I get the privilege of living the full day without the obsession of mine around my food addiction. And I'm free from the excess food. I'm free from the food chatter. I don't have cravings, and I'm living free. And for me, it's like I want to scream it from the mountaintop. And only certain people can connect with that. If you're like me, identify as a compulsive overeater or as a food addict. My wife, she's empathetic, but she's not been in my shoes. She's not been in my shoes.
I'm just gonna piggyback on that. First of all, I don't want to let this opportunity go by as far as an apple tree just making apples, because I think that the call comes to you in very quiet and light ways. For me, in the beginning of this journey with Bright Line Eating, when I would be sitting it was mostly the We Eat Bright with Lines, but then I ventured off and found other, mostly private groups, but also the official group. And I would feel that nudge every once in a while to post. And it could be a then and now picture. It could be, just something maybe humorous, maybe a meme. But I would just get a little nudge in my spirit that, hey, I'm going to put something out there. Or a lot of times it was just answering a question, because I had a little bit more experience now than what I had, a few months earlier. And so I would just be brave enough, or I'd get my bravery up and just answer the question. Sometimes I wasn't even correct, but somebody else would come on. Nobody kicked me off the forum because I didn't know the exact measurement. But I think that is the thin thread too. It's not about doing big things or what we perceive as big. It's doing what is just answering the call, whatever the call that is in you. I think we all have it. Everybody here has it. Everybody came tonight has it. And we have that power to continue that.
I agree with what you're saying, Noreen, and I heard a concept from Everett. I believe he pronounces his name Constantine. He's a counselor based in Hawaii who has gotten help for his own journey through Bright Line Eating. Has a connection with Susan and offers teaching around internal family systems, which is also known as parts work. And he joined a men's call that happens every Saturday afternoon. And I so appreciated what he had offered in his share. And it was along these lines of all of us have a different tolerance level for what's called accountability. And, for one person, it may be their willingness to make a public post or a post on a site. For another person, it might be, I'm willing to make a comment, offer something from my experience. But what would it look like for you to stretch your accountability tolerance from where it currently is one or two steps further? And what might it look like for you to having considered doing that, to be on the other side of that? How might that make a difference in your life? And that really helped me, because that's part of what I feel like I've been doing, is stretching my accountability tolerance, my willingness to live my journey out loud. And I'm not recommending that for everybody. Of course, I've had the thoughts, well, what if I do this video and then somehow I end up in the jackpot and I'm doing another research project, eating off plan? And I had to let that go, because that's not what my journey is about. It's not about clinging to the future, and it's not about living in the past. It's about one day at a time, every day, bright for today. And so I'm going to live in that place and not be concerned about that fear that popped up on the radar screen. But one story I wanted to share, and I've got permission to do this. Somebody I just saw that is in the participant list had been following some of my posts, in the page is called Bright Line Eating Official. And the other page that Noreen has it was at the front of this, Starting Out Bright Private, which is not it is a private. You get to become a member of that, and then none of your friends see what happens with your posts or other posts. But I've been posting on the Bright Line Eating Official page, and this individual reached out to me and said, I'm interested in 12-step recovery. And I shared a few different options, and also included my home meeting, which is Monday night, 6 o'clock Central Time. And that very next Monday, she showed up. She was there on the Zoom meeting, and she chose to speak. And she had a beautiful share. And it was her first time stepping into 12-step recovery. And I believe it was her first time stepping out of doing it alone. So I've made up this little expression of BLE and LA, Bright Line Eating, no longer alone. Because for me, recovery is not an individual sport. It really is a team sport. And I've got this band of brothers that is awesome. I've got an accountability partner who calls me his sponsor, and he's called me his sponsor for, I don't know, probably 10 years. And we've been journeying together, but both of us at times wallowing in the problem while still doing recovery, versus living in the solution. I noticed in the prelude, you had the one day at a time, every day, ODAAT, ED, every day. And this other individual, so anyway, the lady who showed up in the Monday night 12-step meeting. First time in a meeting, she chose to speak. And she's the one that shared that cool quote with me. I think I put it in today's post. And at the heart of it is 20 seconds of insane courage. And
Mm.
she indicated that was what it felt like for her to get onto a Zoom meeting for the first time, hear something about 12 steps, a reading from the big book, and speak. She sat all the way down and she spoke. She spoke her name. She identified as a compulsive overeater. And that individual, she's with us tonight, Noreen, and she's willing to be a guest on your show. I've already
Loving
cleared
it.
that with her. And in her first 10 days, she's gone to 9 meetings and
All
she's made
right.
connections and she's got a sponsor who has what she wants. And one of the things that she said to me that I could share is they understood me. I've never felt so understood in my life. And better yet, they had the answer to my biggest question and problem. How do I find and keep abstinence and never binge again? That answer is largely dependent upon a power greater than us. In just 10 days, I already feel so much peace, hope, and excitement about the future. I know when I complete the steps, I want to help others. I want to help others to find the way. And I'm not going to be emotional on the call here, but I feel a great deal of emotion knowing that there was a thin thread, something that I put on Facebook. This person had reached out. She jumped in all the way in, sat all the way down, and she's. I think today is day 69 for her on her Bright Line eating journey. So
That's
isn't that awesome?
fantastic. Yeah. So
One,
now I have
one,
a question
one.
because,
I was gonna share one other story. Somebody else who's also on the call who calls me sponsor, and I call him my BLE partner because he saw me start Bright Landing. He didn't want that. He thought he would have to pull me aside and say, "Oh, you're in some cult, or it's not going to work. It's a diet."
right.
And almost a year to the day that I started it, we were connected regularly, and we both started going back to our 12-step meeting after having dropped out from November 2019 forward. And he said, I want to do this Bright Line eating journey. And from that day forward, he started that day or the next day. He is now 100 plus days, full on 100% sober, bright, without a single bite off plan. And he's the one that I have this meal bookend accountability, which has
Okay.
been so helpful for me.
Now, I really wanted to talk about that. So I'm glad you brought up the accountability piece. 2 things. One, the other day when we talked, you mentioned to me, Noreen, I saw in December that you were 65 pounds less. And then you posted the 25% off. And both of those are true, 6 months apart. They're also the same number. Well, I mean, I'm at like 67 and a half. But I felt like I was hemming and hawing with you, and I wasn't being fully like transparent. So I went back to all my accountability sheets in the last few days, and I noticed a pattern. I was totally bright, except there and there and there and there.
Yeah.
And so I just want to tell you that I knew that just as I was really being asked, I was feeling like I was dodging. And this accountability piece is so important. And I know that you do an incredible, I mean, like an overstep almost, what some might look like, unless they're in your shoes and have gone on your path. So could you take us through what your accountability looks like in a day?
Sure, I'd be happy to. And I think in the prelude, Noreen included a few pictures, and those are off my iPhone. And this is what I and my accountability partner do every day, every meal. So our commitment is we won't eat a single thing until we have prepared whatever it is that we're going to eat, plated meaning it's not from jar to hand to mouth, it's on a plate. Pictured it, we take a picture with it and we text it via the iPhone. And that's our commitment when we send the picture. Okay, I'm going to start my meal, and it's assumed that when we won't eat anything else. If we're going to pick up something more, I got to take another picture. And that little bit of accountability, and I kind of timed it. It probably takes 30 seconds a day because I've got to do all the other stuff anyway, if I'm being honest with myself. 10 seconds a meal to take the picture and to text it. And that's all it takes. But that has saved me because what happened last fall, and it was my accountability partner that identified this, and he's the one that came up with the term, "Oh, Ed, it sounds like you're doing recreational eating." This was last fall. And I said, "Yeah, but I think it's okay." Justification. And so we've come up with this approach where since probably sometime late December or probably January when he started, um, I don't eat anything unless I've taken a picture of it and sent it to my buddy, and he does the same. And here's the thing: we've agreed that, hey, if you're going to binge, we're free to do that, right? But the commitment is everything before I put it in my mouth, it'll be on a plate and it'll be in a picture, and I send it. So if it's 20 elements to my binge in a given night, it would be 20 pictures. And the agreement is we're just going to talk about it. Tell me what was going on. And it's not about shame, it's about connection. What I've read and I figured out for myself, my food addiction, my compulsive overeating, it's an intimacy issue. I've got this false connection with food that really isn't intended to be there, and it doesn't accomplish what I think it's going to accomplish. So somehow, by taking it out of my head of Ed doing his best thinking, and I'm the guy that continues to gain weight when I'm on my own, and saying I don't do that anymore. I am accountable, and that story that I shared, Noreen, with you, and I think I might have posted about it, but I called it the best nut I never had. And this was in March, where I needed to add make another addition to my food plan. And once you reach your goal weight, it's part of what's called the maintenance stance. And I had anxiety over it because I didn't like change, and I didn't know if I could handle it. I didn't want it to trigger stuff. But I added a full protein to my dinner meal. So now I get 12 ounces or 2 servings of protein at dinner. And that very night, I still had the Costco container of raw organic nuts on the table in my scale. And I had the thought, one more nut. And my next thought was, oh, I'd have to put it on a plate, take a picture of it, and send it to my buddy. And I had to laugh because it's like, I'm not going to do that. And it helped me to celebrate that was the best nut I never had. It was really a gift.
You never had, and who can forget that when you have described it that way? And look at the integrity in this. Look at the integrity that you have going on. It's really quite amazing.
Well, when people might say, oh, that's rigid or it's extreme or, that's not realistic. But I got to tell you, for me, it's what I need, and it's freedom. And so I celebrate that. And that's part of my message tonight is this is my bright path. But each of you who are listening, who are afflicted in the same way that I am as a food addict or a compulsive overeater, if that's your scenario, and if you're high in the susceptibility scale, my encouragement, my question is, what would it look like for you to embrace what your bright path is so that you too can say one day at a time, every day? Because for me, I think I made a comment that I've learned that there is no such thing as a BLE compliant snack. Last fall, I would have said, no, it's BLE compliant. Well, it's just not true. If I'm eating off plan, outside of my meal time, it's not weighed and measured. It's not compliant, and I'm not sober. That's part of what I've had to come to terms with is that's my condition. But there was another post I had, which was a lot of fun for me. The expression extra, extra, read all about it. Yeah. And I said, extra, extra, Ed, please don't doubt it. And there were 4 things that I wanted to make sure that I remembered. And I got it right there in my saved Facebook post, so I can refer back to it.
What are the 4 things? Do you remember?
Yeah, my diagnosis, I'm a food addict. I've done the research. I'm done with the research. I get it. The prescription, there's 4 bright lines, unambiguous. They're clearly defined. I just don't cross them. I don't take a bite off plan ever. That's the prescription. If I want to follow doctor's orders, it's not Ed figuring out how do I adjust that. That's the plan.
The
And
blurry
then,
fuzzy, or the blurry fuzzy lines, what is
well,
it?
yeah, because last fall I would have these blurry, murky, fuzzy lines, and it's bright line eating. It's not blurry, murky, fuzzy eating, which is what, for me, that's what I want to slide into because I like that, and yet the consequences for me are pretty severe, and I know for other people who might be battling diabetes or blood sugar issues, I do view this as a life-threatening issue for me. I'm battling for my life. Fortunately, today it doesn't feel like a battle. There's really nothing white knuckle about my experience. I think it's something that has grown out of something else that's happening. And sometimes I like to say that my sobriety is at the intersection of grace, miracle, mystery, surrender, willingness, and acceptance. And these are all recovery themes and spiritual themes that for me have grown beyond what I'll call happy God talk and become something very authentic.
You know, I really didn't think about food sobriety. And when you were talking about the recreational eating, and you were saying if you had someone you knew who was battling alcoholism, you would never say, well, what do you do for just to have a little? You wouldn't do that. You wouldn't do that at all. And I always thought, like with food, there is no such thing because you have to eat. That's always been the problem
Right,
that we
right.
get to eat.
Yeah.
But this is what such a blessing, as far as knowing these four bright lines will keep you food sober.
That's exactly it, Noreen. I think you've hit it on the head that for the alcoholic, they can drink all kinds of things, just not alcohol. And for me, the variety that I have in my 3 meals a day is amazing. I can eat all kinds of things, not flour, not sugar, and not in between meals. And I weigh and measure it. But we, those of us who follow the plan, there's 5 things that we eat: vegetables, fruit, protein, fat, and grain. It's those 5 things. And guess what? Little Debbie is not my friend. And when my buddy reached out to me via text, November of 2019, Ed, how are you? And this is after 3 years of not talking because I dropped out of the recovery program when I had a job change. He had dropped out. And I was in the middle of a season where I was so addicted to, I don't know if people have heard of these things called Kind bars.
Oh
And
yeah,
they got a clear wrapper and you can see the nuts, it's good for you.
they're
Uh,
healthy.
but at the core of that is all that sugar that's holding it all together. And I had to admit at some point that, Ed, it's a candy bar.
Yeah.
It's not what you think it is. And it was not kind to me. So Little Debbie's not my friend. Kind bars are not kind. The standard American diet is, I believe, construed to be addictive for those who partake and who are susceptible to that. And that's part of my passion. 42% of Americans are obese. Many are morbidly obese, as I was. And I have such heartfelt empathy and compassion for those who are suffering. And I have an equal amount or more hope that the path can be bright for every single individual without exception. That's my belief. And tonight I was praying that it wouldn't be about me. This interview, it kind of is about me, but it would be about other individuals finding that thin thread of moving them from wherever their current state is, if it's a state of stuckness or good day, bad day, bad day, bad day, good day, or I was bright up until I wasn't, and embrace this idea that 100% bright sobriety is amazing. From my perspective, and from this other individual that I've not named, and I wouldn't name him, the guy who calls me sponsor, he and I both are stunned and amazed on a regular basis. And we can share that with one another because we get it.
Yes.
Others who don't struggle in this way maybe don't get it so much.
Well, I think it's incredible what you're sharing as far as your joy is just coming through. And I would not say, is that your greatest non-scale victory? What would you say overall are the non-scale victories you've experienced beyond all of these beautiful feelings that you've mentioned?
Yeah, here's the thing, Noreen. I had an experience, and I think I might have written about this. I was in my 12-step meeting Monday night, and I had a meeting with my tax man, and it kind of got close to the start time. So I started my car. I was pulled over to the side. I failed to turn off my lights. And I mentioned in a post, I've got a Honda Fit. It's a 2013. And so toward the end of the meeting, I go to start my car to drive home, and I go off camera, and it won't start. So I thought, okay, well, I got to walk home. It's a mile and a half. And I popped back on the video and said, friends, I'm practicing taking life on life's terms, which is one of the recovery expressions, because my car won't start. So I'm walking home, and I have joy in doing so because I don't have to live with the kind of anger and frustration that I used to have to live with because of the things that were stirring inside that I wasn't really in touch with. Oh, okay, I'm walking home. I'm okay with that. Grateful it's a nice day. So I share that as a small example, but when you say, what are the non-scale victories? It's these thin threads. This lady who joined a meeting and went to 9 meetings in 10 days and who has something she didn't have when she was doing the journey alone. That for me is a non-scale victory because I get to celebrate this other person who's finding their right path in their way. I saw an email, which is unusual for a 12-step recovery group for men, compulsive overeaters, and the subject was looking for somebody who sponsors by weighing and measuring food. And a lot of people resist that idea. And so I gave them a little bit of my story, and I said, I'm not sure I can sponsor, but I can coach you. And so we work out a time to talk, and this is somebody from Romania. It's noontime during a workday. I'm making my lunch. I'm on camera. He's on camera. It's 8 o'clock at night. And between the two of us, he finds the Bright Line Eating website. I tell him, give him some tips. And I don't know what that thin thread might lead to for that man, but that's a non-scale victory for me because I'm available and present to see these gifts everywhere.
And I have to mention a different Zoom call that you mentioned to me the other day that someone said about your muscles.
Yeah, so this is a funny story. It was a work meeting, and we're on camera, and I don't have a sweater on. It's a Nike shirt, and this lady says, Ed, I got to tell you, your arms are looking really skinny. She said, in fact, you're looking a lot more like olive oil than Popeye. And it just cracked me up, and I so enjoyed that, and I sat with it through the weekend. I had fun sharing it. This lady, I'm really close to her, and I enjoyed her comment. And I realized through the weekend that I'm okay with having toothpick olive oil arms, but there was something that grabbed my attention about if I can be the Popeye of hope and encouragement to others who are so the same afflicted, who have the same affliction that I have. Boy, that's exciting. The Popeye of hope and encouragement. And I do eat a lot of raw spinach in my salads, and I enjoy that quite a bit these days. So I thought that was funny.
That's awesome. Well, Ed, I got to quickly look and see if we have any questions here because I don't want to let anybody be missed out here. So there's really like just so many like high fives to you, Ed. That great about the accountability. Is there a 12-step group for BLE? I know that
there's a couple thoughts on this. Tony Wade is very active in the Bright Line Eating community, and he's done an amazing job of setting up a collection of Zoom meetings. I believe many who are involved do have a background in 12-step work. So that's a resource if people are interested in the same tips that I offered to this other BLE participant who's now has a 12-step sponsor and is plugged into 12-step specifically for compulsive overeaters. I'm more than happy to share the 3 tips that I shared with her, and she's given me permission to share her name, but in 12-step, it's all about anonymity, and I just have sensitivity to that. So if Noreen and this lady connect around her time to be interviewed, I think she would have a whole lot to say, and I think it would be an awesome story. So we'll make that connection. But those are a couple of ideas, and I know the Bright Line Eating program offers a lot of different options. And Susan's encouragement is stay close to the mothership. And here's my view on that is I think we all need to have our own sense of what's the mothership so that we're not just trying to do it on our own. And that's the adventure part. What does that look like for you? It doesn't have to be my bright path. It doesn't have to be 12-step. It could be parts work. It could be a high functioning mastermind group where people are really connected, a lot of authenticity and consistency, and whatever that might take shape to be. But I do think in our community, there's some awesome people and there's opportunity for intimacy. If you slow that word down, it's kind of fun because it becomes in, to, me, see. When I did my first 12-step, the amount of self-disclosure that's required to put pen to paper, work all 5 columns, and do it in the context of a trusted relationship with a sponsor and say it out loud. There's something about that was a huge step forward for me. And the alternative to that is my wife and I were just out for a walk and she noticed a blue tarp over a big pile of mulch. And I used to have that as a word picture that I don't know what's going on inside, but it's like I got a blue tarp over it to keep, it's like I would absorb stuff. I wouldn't process it. I would put it under the blue tarp, stand on it and say, God, I trust you. When in reality, I'm trusting in the food that's doing for me that which food is not designed to do. That's what my hope has been in. And I think as I've peeled back the layers of self-protection and have been able to be intimate in self and in safe and healthy environments, it's made a huge, huge difference for me. So that 3-legged stool, whatever it looks like for you, do the deeper work and find your path. That's my encouragement.
Well, I can't believe we only have a couple minutes left, Ed, and I want to give you a moment to speak to that person who's here tonight or who's going to be watching this Starting Out Bright episode at a later time. And thanks again for letting me record it. What would you say to them about Bright Line Eating or getting into 12-step or anything?
So whenever I go to a meeting, my hope rises. Whatever state I'm in, when I come into that meeting room and I take my place at the table, as I move through that process of people sharing their red dot truth, me sharing mine, some content, my hope rises. My hope is that for individuals tonight or who listen, that somehow you'd have the experience of hope rising. And then the next question is, what do you want to do with that? Can you get curious in the direction about expanding accountability tolerance? What might that look like? With respect to groups or one-on-one, I think 4 things are important: honesty, authenticity, safety, and consistency. I think those are really important. Find your path, whatever that might look like, your band of brothers, your sisters, your equivalent of an accountability partner or a sponsor. And for me, it's almost like my eyes have been opened. My heart is perceiving things that it wasn't so attuned to before, and I'm seeing gifts everywhere. They're just all around. And there's something really special for me in having that experience. And it doesn't mean that I don't have hard stuff, but the long version of the Serenity Prayer teaches us that hardship is a pathway to peace. And if you don't know the long version of the Serenity Prayer, you can Google it. Some guy with a German name, Reinhold Niebuhr, I think it is. And that's something that in my faith-based 12-step group, we say it at the end of every meeting. And I just say it often privately. Other prayers, Thomas Merton's prayer is a good one. You can Google 3rd-step prayer, 6-step prayer, 7-step prayer. It's amazing for a secular program such as many of the 12-step programs are. There's a whole lot of God's at the center of so much of the deep transformative work. And that's what I believe as well. And I wrote a post on the God of your understanding because somebody said they struggle with the whole God thing, but somehow in my post, it seems more palatable. And I thought, you can't start any place else other than with the God of your understanding. If I tried to start with the God of somebody else's understanding, I would be shooting all over myself, and that's not how to go through life. More will be revealed.
Well, Ed, I can't believe we've got our hour done already. And you have brought a lot of hope, I know, tonight. And I just thank you so much for being here, for sharing your story, for your vulnerability, and just beautiful, beautiful concepts that you just express so easily to us, that it seems so easily, and some practical tips too. So thank you again, and I hope that we'll be in conversation often as the days, the weeks, the years go on.
Well,
So
Noreen, thank you. And I just want to say there are some people who are listening who have been my prayer partners, because one of the things I get concerned about, sometimes I get nervous, and then I try to, well, what should I say instead of just in the flow? And I feel like I've been more of my authentic self tonight. And I'm really grateful. Thank you for those who have prayed with me. I appreciate it.
thank you again, and for all of you for being here. So I am going to close as I close each week. Good night. Stay bright. Don't let the bed bugs bite. Good night, everybody.
Good night, Noreen.
Good
Thank
night.
you. Thank you. Hit me with your 3 questions,
Three
Noreen.
questions.
I'll do the best I can.
Okay. So what have I think that I've heard that you've exercised now, that you've gotten into maintenance, right?
Yes. Well,
What?
actually, exercise has been a part of my journey for some time, but go ahead.
Okay, so what are you loving about exercise these days?
I feel like as I've gotten into my right size body, my experience with exercise has been one of those things that I feel is really life giving to me. I have 2 running buddies, and um, I enjoy that. I enjoy running alone. I made an investment and got a Peloton bike this past January, and I like it a whole lot more than I even thought I would. And when I go to the doc, he tells me, your resting heart rate is 42 or 46, and that's pretty low, but it's because I'm in good condition. And who would have thought that a guy that
Wow.
used to be 155 pounds more than I am today would have the kind of physical recovery that I'm enjoying. So I go for bike rides with buddies. I saw one of the buddy was on earlier. He and I just did that, and I find it's a joy, life-giving thing for me to get physically active now.
So you're
When
talking about Peloton bike
uh,
ride, or are you talking about outside bike ride?
I do both. Yeah, I
Okay.
do both, and I've got a buddy in the BLE community where we'll set up a schedule sometimes and ride together, states apart,
Okay.
but be able to chat on video while we're doing our workouts. But it's really been a part of the joy that I've had. And when I was over 330 pounds, my counselor, who wanted me to go on drugs for depression, which I chose not to do, he said, okay, then you got to start walking. So I'd have to, I don't remember what it was, 30 minutes a day. And for a guy that's 330 plus pounds, that was hard to do. And
Yeah.
it's been quite a journey, but physical recovery has been a really awesome part of it for me.
Wow. Well, that's great. Question number 2. Have you had any surprising finds in food? Like, have you had any
Yes, I
surprising
have.
discoveries?
So I've got a pantry now that's not full of nut butter, because I found out that's a problem. But I love beans in my salad. Who would have thought that I'd be having beans for protein? Um, but I get these at Fresh Time, and black beans, red kidney beans, garbanzo beans. I don't really study which ones are better for you or whatever, but I crack open a can. I take half for my salad. Today, it's usually 3.5 or 4 ounces, and then I augment with cheese for my protein. And I'm not intentionally plant-based, but I can go a whole day and not have any meat because of just choices I'm making. And I didn't think that was even possible for a guy like me.
Well, now I'm wondering, because you say you have this incredible accountability with the photographs and everything, how do you manage that with going to an event? What do you do? I know with
Well,
COVID, you probably haven't had as many, but
yeah.
what's the plan, Stan?
Yeah, I have eaten out, and I haven't brought my scale. I use the one plate rule. I'm probably pretty accurate with my assessment of how much protein and vegetables and things like that. But I find that at restaurants, I'll often need to get extra because it's not enough. At my dinner
Right.
meal, I now have 12 ounces of protein, 12 ounces of vegetables, and a fat serving, and that's not typical for a restaurant. So I might have to order a side of broccoli or asparagus and make sure I get my vegetable allotment in.
Those maintenance ads are no joke. That's like a lot of
Well,
food.
it is a lot of food, and I get a double protein at my breakfast meal also. But I think part of it's because I'm active, and I only eat 3 times a day, so it's not like I'm grazing like I used to.
Right. And you have so much energy from all the exercising. So win, win, win.
Yeah.
So that is awesome. You're awesome, Ed. And thank you for playing Three Question Thursday.
Thank you, Noreen.
Thanks
Great
so much.
pleasure to be here. Appreciate your service.
Really happy you could be here. Good night, everybody. Good night and
Okay,
stay bright.
great. Thank you, Noreen. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.